So, Nick, we are heading into the holidays, and this is a complicated time for a lot of people. It's like I really feel the collective pressure to like have holiday and do things in a certain way. But in our community, I think we do have more freedom of how we look at that. I also thought it would be really good to talk about boundaries, especially as they pertain to maybe family members and ways to kind of think about boundaries that are
Yeah.
self-loving.
Yeah. Being a therapist, seeing queer people, being queer myself, this time of year has like this rising anxious energy. It's like on one hand, it's a time of year when your heart does like it comes a little bit higher towards the surface, I think. It's like we are a little more connected to our hearts. And also there's like the trauma and the sort of complications of like being with family, being queer, your family maybe not being queer, and like all the complications that come with that, all the history that comes with that. And so it ends up being, yeah, somewhat of a maybe disorienting time or an anxiety-ridden time. So I guess we just want to, I don't know, I guess just give some suggestions, things to think about as we enter the holiday season as queer people.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of people, I would imagine, don't feel that they can just skip out on holidays, even if they want to. So I do think boundaries are really important to talk about. So let's sort of start with that scenario, maybe, So, and this really can apply to anything and everything. But we're kind of talking about the holidays. So,
Yeah.
um, I think, when I think about boundaries, I what I usually tell my clients, like in terms of me setting my boundary, if my boundary is fairly high, I do that for the purpose of, like, I don't want to let them irritate me.
Mhm.
Because if my boundary is lowered, like let's say they're canceling at the last minute all the time, or they're no showing and having trouble, whatever the thing is, if my boundary is very low, and this could be a family member, right, saying things that are making me uncomfortable. If my boundary is very low, I'm building up this kind of like resentment, and I'm building up emotion that makes it very difficult for me to stay open-hearted and loving towards this person. And I'm in charge of that. So it's easy to think, like that person is just bad, but no, I'm the one that's actually in charge here. Now, me raising my boundary and like lovingly saying to a family member, it's really, the politics are really complicated this year, and I'd really rather not talk about them. If they have trouble with that, that's not ours, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if we are like, if I'm coming from a really loving place and
Mhm.
I'm saying I want to keep it loving between us, I want to keep an open heart towards you. This is what I need to do that, and I'm taking responsibility for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't know if I could say that any better than you just did, or I don't know if I have anything to add on. I think before the holidays, now is the time to get in touch with, well, what are the trigger points for you? What feels hard about going home for the holidays, going somewhere for the holidays that has history? Um, and then what boundaries need to be put in place to kind of protect you from possibly getting like re-traumatized in some way.
Yeah.
And then to think about like even just imagining yourself putting down that boundary in a loving way, like what you just said, like could we, when I come home this year, it's been intense. Could we please, not talk about these particular things? Um, then that part of you that like is really stressing about might this happen, is this going to happen again, can relax, and your heart actually can open a little bit more, provided that they respect that boundary. If they don't
Right.
have any language around boundaries, they might not even understand what you're saying, and then you might need to go back down to even more basics, or you might need to like actually think about, is it okay to go into this space, right?
Right. I mean, naturally, again, if your focus is on like, I'm going to keep my own personal space, a space of love, and I put up my boundary and they're not respecting it,
Mhm.
it just means that I need to go further and further until I can feel safe. I can protect my own ability to stay in a good place, right? And I think, honestly, in these next few weeks, even just exploring in therapy the idea of possibly not going home, or, maybe you go home and you don't stay like right in the family house. Maybe you like, there's all kinds of ways to think about how to keep yourself in a good place. I'm saying this knowing that it is very, very difficult when we get into the original soup that we were cooked in, it becomes all kinds of things come up. But I think any kind of preparation that we do about this time is really worthwhile.
Yeah. So right now, if you are in therapy, taking that time to explore what you need so that you can go into it with a little bit of intentionality, right? Um, and yeah, then there's like more physical boundaries, like how do you want to stay in the same house, and more, and then there's more sort of emotional, energetic boundaries of like maybe what areas we want to keep sort of off limits, what we don't want to talk about, things that you might bring up in therapy, but you don't want to bring up at home.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think on the queer piece, I think that for most of us, our reality was that we had to self-abandon early on, and we just had to focus on like our survival and our caretakers' comfort, our surroundings' comfort, our community's comfort, so that we could just fit in and survive. And so I think the really uncomfortable thing that happens around queer holidays is that we feel like in order to kind of like go back into some situation, we have to abandon self again. And that is like incredibly triggering. It's happened to me. I've heard it happen to many clients before. It's so difficult to, and it can even happen unconsciously. It can even happen without you even realizing, and suddenly you're completely dissociated from yourself. So, yeah, the intentionality of like thinking about these things beforehand, the awareness of maybe that pattern and how it plays out, and then reminding yourself that you are allowed to have boundaries. Like you are allowed to
Yeah.
come into this situation in a way that works for you.
Yeah. Nick, I also want to, what's coming up for me now is for people who might be financially tied to parents, you know, which deepens the complication, right? So there's people that actually don't have the ability to say, I don't want to stay. I'm going to stay at a motel, down the road. Like they're very tied. And so again, like using your space in therapy or with your queer community, your friends. And I think if that's the case, there's kind of like a premeditative thing of going in and connecting with self so that there's some sort of internal boundary created as you're going into a difficult scene, right? That is still true. I mean, I just keep thinking about Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and the incredible power that we have over our internal experience, no matter what's going on outside of us.
Mhm.
So, yeah, any kind of preparation. I mean, I'm kind of big on dress rehearsal. So,
Yeah.
any sort of preparation before going into a difficult situation, I think is great.
I think that's the main thing we're advocating for, like taking the time to connect with self and like being a bit intentional about it. I think the other thing is, yeah, what you said, which is reaching out to queer community. Like you need going into these stressful holiday situations, these triggering holiday situations, you need to have that lifeline person that you can call. And hopefully they can call you too, who just understands your experience, like they don't, you can even tell them, like, you don't have to say anything brilliant. You just have to like listen to my experience and let me express my emotions, whether it's anger or grief or whatever it is that's coming up in the moment. You need
Yeah.
to have something called like, don't go through it alone, I think is the biggest other than taking some time beforehand to think about what you need, like don't go through it alone. Just make sure you have that person to call, those couple people to call, that group text, that queer group text. I love the
Yeah.
queer group text. If you have that, if you're
Yeah.
lucky enough to have that, these are things that you need to set up ahead of time as well.
Yeah, totally. There's also, I feel like there's so much, I feel so much grief in the holidays. That's always super present for me. It's grief about all kinds of things. It's about people that are no longer around. It's
Right.
about it's a lot of loss comes up in the holidays. And so
Right.
I think that that's the big disservice, like this whole hallmark of it all, that it's just supposed to be so jolly. And in reality, it's a mix of a lot of things with a lot of heart, a lot of grief. It's complicated with family.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can be really lonely because there's all these it's that Mariah message. It's like you're supposed to have your one for the holidays, right? Like very sort of heteronormative one. So I think that leads to my other point, which is like the idea of queering your holidays too, and that it doesn't always have to be the same thing. If you have the ability to create something new and different, it might not have to be completely new and different. It could just be that you have like one new queer tradition as part of your holidays.
Yeah.
Might even just be like a FaceTime for an hour. But to connect with your queer, expansive energy and figure out like what what new and creative way can I experience this holiday that I have a lot of old heteronormative experience with.
Yeah. Queerness is your power.
All right.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks.